So really excited to have Ollie. Ollie and I have actually been connected for a few years now.
It's been a long time. I think this is the first time we're speaking though on camera, right?
I think it is. I think we've been mostly LinkedIning and emailing. The reason we wanted to bring Ollie in today is we're talking about generating money, not just budgeting and cutting and no more avocado toast and no more coffee and no more travels. But we know that the economy is getting a little bit tighter and people are worrying about money more and more. And so we thought we'd start talking about how to make more money, not just how to cut money out. And who better to speak about entrepreneurship and young people than Ollie Forsyth? I am not going to give you his story because we'll just be here for the next hour and a half. But suffice to say, Ollie was a very, very young entrepreneur, and now he's just a young entrepreneur. So we've asked Ollie to give a bit of a story about sort of where he's been, how he's gotten where he's gotten to, what his interest and passion is. And then we're going to take questions and comments and thoughts and talk about how you can make money, not just be cutting out of your life. So Ollie, welcome, and over to you, sir.
Hey, no, thank you. No, for those of you who don't know, so Vivi and I think first connected when you maybe just starting Blackbullion, right? Was this 7 years ago?
Yeah, about 7 years ago when I was doing, before we were a technology company. Yeah.
Wow. So I was, I think, when you were saying young, I think I was about 15. So I started my first company age 13. It was a online e-commerce website for teenagers. And maybe, similar to some people on this call today, wasn't particularly academic at school, and I just loved meeting people and just loved, making a bit of an income as a young teenager. So I started this first company. It was an e-commerce website for teenagers, basically. So if you think Amazon, but not as big, not as large, where mums, dads, or your friends and family can find the perfect gift. Present for friends, family members, etc. Anyway, had no capital time to really start the company, and I thought, as a 13-year-old, of course, you don't really have any money, right? So I thought, how do I get some free money? So I got in. I found the perfect couple of products I wanted to sell initially, and I got in touch with 10 different suppliers around the world. And the deal was, in order for me to pursue with them or, continue speaking, they have to send me 10 free samples, no cost. So you have 10 suppliers, 10 factories, and you 10 free products, no cost. So you have basically 100 free products. Sold those for £10 each, made my kind of first £1,000. And from that, I think the initial products were those kind of friendship bracelets. Some of you may remember were kind of like a massive craze at the time. They were £10 each. I think in the first 6 months when I started the company, I think 6,000 were sold. So something like £60,000 in revenue in your first 6 months at 13. And then you have media writing about you, celebrity collaborations. But kind of fast forward story, I've always just loved meeting entrepreneurs, loved diving into this technology scene. Started a magazine at 16. This was more to encourage young people to start a company. Probably similar time when actually Vivi and I connected. I think just what was happening in education and in the entrepreneur world, it was a big passion to get young people started learning about entrepreneurship. The challenge was, and I'm very dyslexic, so I couldn't actually read and write until I was 14 or 15, and quite a few entrepreneurs were quite similar, and reading these massive in-depth magazines was very challenging, right? So I thought, right, let's just create an entrepreneurs magazine. It's just very simple to read, fun interviews. I got to interview people like Richard Branson and I can't remember who else, but I think 60,000 readers in the first year. Launched it into a podcast a couple of years later. That had about 90,000 weekly listeners. And where I am today, now on the other side, so we invest in tech companies. So now 24, I've been in venture capital for the last 3 years now, I think. So we invest in entrepreneurs, people with maybe just an idea. You could be starting a beauty company, you might be starting a software company, maybe a fintech company, We just love meeting founders, and if we believe in your vision, then we'd love to invest in you. So I work at a company called Antler. We are a global early stage venture capital fund. We're currently operating in 22 different markets. We invest in 500 companies every year. And I look after all of our founders once they receive funding. So we have 500 portfolio companies now. And for them as well, how do we get them connected to investors, potential customers? How do we allow them to expand internationally? And I think it's just a really exciting time to be a founder. We're starting to talk more about how to make potentially additional means of income in the future. I think there are a couple of ways. I mean, I'm a big believer that at some point all of us will have a side hustle in the future. So I've written about this new, I think, category we're entering called the creator economy, where in the future all of us should have some form of side hustle. But more importantly, if you think about all of the tech platforms we use today, like Spotify, if you're into gaming, if it's maybe you're on a dating app, the only way these platforms are making money is because of our contributions. I think like the next era of the future of the internet we're going towards, we should be, as consumers, compensated in some capacity based on our contributions towards platforms and communities. So we take like a fintech app, or if we take like a fintech community, if they start charging $10 a month, and you as fintech enthusiasts are starting to participate, we should be compensated in some capacity, right? But anyway, that's kind of the story. That's where I think potentially the future is holding, where some of us may launch side hustles as such. But it's really exciting, and just very happy, very open, happy to take any questions, or let me know how we can help you.
Yeah, so that's a great intro, Ollie, and I'm sure as people are digesting your story, questions will come out. So I'll just get us kicked off. Some of the language you use, obviously, I'm very comfortable with because I've been in this game for a little while. But can you explain to people kind of what is funding, what is venture capital? We hear, about unicorns in the technology world, and we all know what they're talking about. And you speak to other people and they're like, unicorns, what the hell's a unicorn? So can you just work through some of the language? So somebody has an idea and they call you up and they go, Ollie, I have an idea, but I don't know how to start. How does funding come into it? What are the kind of steps people should be thinking about beyond the idea?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you hear about angel investing, venture capital, all of this is very much associated to an entrepreneur, maybe similar to people on today's call. They have an idea and they're looking for some form of investors or some form of investment from a particular group of investors. Angel investors is typically the first type of investors you would have on your journey. So your first initial investors in simple terms, and then as your company, your side hustle or business starts to grow, you have investors who have a slightly more deep pockets and have more capital to invest in you. So those are venture capitalists, which is what we do. And in terms, sorry, what was the second part of your question?
So just how do people start? How do you get?
Yeah, how to start? I mean, honestly, I think it's actually a lot of it is about meeting people in the same industry or talking to some of your friends who you may be interested in selling a product to, and just really collecting those insightful insights or pieces of feedback that people are happy to provide to you. You basically want to understand, is someone going to buy my product or not, which is not a family member, right? Family members don't count because they're always going to be the people who buy your first product. And I think there are probably two types of businesses you can start. One is kind of the side hustle. The side hustle is something you have a passion for now, but it's not going to make you a lot of money, right? A side hustle is something you do in your spare time when you have the time, and it's typically one or two people. Maybe it's yourself and a family friend or a friend who's helping you. Or you can go down the more entrepreneurial career where you basically really start a company and you want to build a big team essentially build a big company, right? I think there are two different ways to going around. If you want to be a bit more reserved and a bit more, you want to learn about how things operate initially, maybe you start off by doing a side hustle, learning about, how to market the product, how to sell your idea, how do you become better interacting with consumers, how do you start hiring maybe your friends to join the company. And I think all of these early learning steps and early learning days really support to help you to build a bigger company in the future. When you're comfortable and you have this amazing idea that you think can potentially change the world, because all entrepreneurs think that, and that's fine, then it's a case of you just got to really hustle. Like a lot of the entrepreneurs who we meet today, I would say some of the characteristics in them, they hustle very hard. I mean, like you can probably resonate, right? I mean, it takes a long time to build a big company, and you shouldn't be afraid to fail, because I think it's something like 80% of companies will fail at some point. But they're very good at selling. I think if you can sell and you can convince anyone to invest in you or buy your product, that's probably what I would focus on. So how can you persuade people to come and work for you, invest in you, buy your product? Can you eventually convince someone to buy your company? But that's how I would probably get started.
I could not agree more. And I think the hustle is something, when I hear people say that they set up their own business for a work-life balance, I always want to die laughing, because there is no work-life balance when you're running a business. I in the early days was working 18 hours a day. Now I only work 16 hours a day. There's no, so the hustle is really important. There's no kind of way, really, there's no way around that. But I would also echo your thoughts on selling. I think if there's one skill that makes the difference between success and failure, it's the ability to sell an idea, sell your product, sell your service, sell to investors. Being able to convince somebody of what you're saying, which is all sales is, I think is one of the fun. You can get other people to build stuff in the early days. You can do a lot by yourself, but if you can't sell, then the whole journey just becomes a lot more kind of difficult. Before we go to the next question, I wonder, of the people in the room, how many people are thinking about, let's do it like this. How many people have an idea for a business? And you can just use the reactions button to give us a hands up or a thumbs up or anything. Who's got an idea for a business that they are kind of looking to get some guidance on? Okay, and who's just generally curious about entrepreneurship, just so that we know kind of where to take the conversation? So do people want to know about hardcore questions about how to do things, or more of a general kind of why is entrepreneurship cool? Okay, just more generally. So Ollie, let's talk about some of the founders that you've kind of met and have kind of thought, these people are going somewhere, this person's got something. What are the characteristics, leaving selling and hustle kind of aside, are there any other natural characteristics that seem to go across the board with successful founders? How would you define, I guess, a successful founder as a starting point?
Yeah. I think they're actually just very good at people and people networking, right? I mean, I think if we take a step back, building, this is not just going to happen overnight, right? This is going to take 5 or 10 years. So yes, we highlighted earlier, it's going to take a lot of, persuasion, conviction, hustling to make it happen. But, I think it's important to also take the time to reflect on how well you're doing. So can this person, yes, be a full-time entrepreneur, but can they take the time off? We do meet founders who they work so hard and you can see it in their eyes, they're so tired. And there's no need to work 18, 19 hours a day. I mean, it was almost like, I think back kind of 8 years ago, it's almost like a competition who could work the hardest and the longest. I don't think that's right anymore. I think it's really important, especially with people's mental health and, extreme tiredness. I think it's really important to kind of take a step back. So that makes a great entrepreneur, I think, someone who can really take a step back, and you've got to also demonstrate that to your team, right? If you're going to go down the more entrepreneurial route and you want to build a big company, can you lead your team in? Yes, it's fine to fail and it's fine to work really hard, but you need to take the time off, right? I think visionaries are very important as well. So it's great you're kind of trying to disrupt or if you're trying to invent basically a new service in a new market, do you really have the vision to take this to the next level, and what's it going to take to get that right? I think it's very easy to kind of hear what's happening in the market, but it's almost you need to be the one inventing the trends, not following the trends. And it's similar to some of the investors, right? Every investor will always tell you the same trend they're following, because every investor talks to each other. The way you stand out as an investor or the entrepreneur is you're inventing the tech trends. So people follow you, and people want to take your money, or people want to invest in you, right? And I think it's just really important to fail fast. If something's not working, there are always going to be fires burning, especially if you're a founder, right? I think it's absolutely fine to fail, but put the fires out, or just don't put them out and don't come back to them, right? If something's not working, then scrap it fast, and maybe there's a new service you should try and provide, or a new product you should try that's maybe slightly better. Or maybe your idea is not the one that's going to succeed, but maybe it's going to be the next one. I think especially investors, they love it when founders fail. So I wouldn't be afraid to fail, but just come back stronger next time. And I think that the last one is have a really supportive network and bubble around you, right? We mentioned earlier is a very hard and difficult challenge and journey, right? You are potentially about to go on. Apart from your family and friends, who are going to be those people there with you who can guide you, maybe take you in the direction you haven't considered, or maybe if you're upset, or if something's just not working, they can be your kind of shining light, right? Who can guide you in the right direction. So if you are starting, or if you're thinking about starting a company at some stage, I would definitely think about who are those kind of 2 to 3 people who can help you along the journey and who can help guide you. Because like we mentioned, it is tough, and I think it's really important to have people who understand the entrepreneurial world to be with you. Unfortunately, friends and family members, they'll always say, don't worry, but they didn't quite understand what's happening.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Especially if you're the first entrepreneur in your family or in your social circle, people think that they understand like it's hard, and they understand that it's stressful, but it really is one of those things that if you're not in it, it's very difficult to understand, especially as you grow out a team, as you have responsibility for all of these other people and their ability to pay their mortgages and pay their rent and put food on the table. And entrepreneurship it's a more difficult journey if you have fewer people around you. So I would very much agree with that. I really like what you're saying about being willing to fail. I think it is a real challenge for today's kind of students, and people have this idea that if they don't get it right straight off, whatever that is, then it's not worth trying. And we see that the number of people going on gap years, for example, is dropping because people don't want to be wasting time. And I'm personally a little bit concerned about this, because this is the time to try new things and to fail and to explore and to experiment. And I wonder if you could maybe in your own history, because you've done a lot of things in the years that you've been in this game, an opportunity where you kind of went, this isn't working, and that's okay, and moved forward. Do you have any great failure stories of your own?
Too many.
Always
too many. I think it's good. I think it's almost like regardless, right? The more times you fail, I think the better thinker or the better visionary, or if a new challenge comes up, you don't care because you've faced similar challenges before, right? If I remember, like in the early days, like when I was first starting at 13, 14, I just message random people, and they would say like, don't stop hassling me, otherwise like I'll report you to the police or something, right? And then like as a 13-year-old, no one's said to you before you're going to report you to the police. Or if it's if it's like a couple of years ago where you get if it's like a lawsuit, or if someone's threatening to take you to legal court, it's like doesn't matter. Like everything always just works out, right? I think it's what I'm trying to say, but. I think if it's about, when is the right time to do something, I think you have to make that own call, right? If you, I I definitely try and start sooner rather than later. I think about this whole time management. I think just always the question should always be, would you regret something in 5 years if you haven't done that? Gap year is, I personally didn't do one, but my brother did one. He loved it. Do I regret not going on one? Not particularly, because then, would you be in job you are today? So I think just really embrace the journey, and if you just take every opportunity as well that comes, right? Maybe starting a company is not for you today, but I see that quite a few people in this call, at university. Maybe you should go and find an internship initially at a company you love. And if you can't get an internship at the company because you submitted an application, well, then think about how do you get into the company without submitting the application that your friends won't have done. Do you write the CEO directly on what they should do better to improve their company? Do you, if it's a startup, for example, and they've just raised $10-20 million, maybe you should reach out to the founder directly and say, congrats, this is who I am, I'm looking for an internship. So I'd always be quite entrepreneurial on how you think about, trying to at least accomplish what you're trying to achieve, right? But just embrace the challenge and embrace the journey, that's what I'd say.
So that's really interesting, because you're differentiating almost between being an entrepreneur and having an entrepreneurial mindset to maybe even just work in the normal, regular world. And I note that you and I met and have had our entire relationship over the last 6 or 7 years on LinkedIn, which I think is a very undervalued tool, especially by students who often don't really milk the value of it. So how would you define or kind of help people to develop that entrepreneurial mindset, even if they're not quite ready to become entrepreneurs? How can you develop that entrepreneurial mindset before you might be ready or never ready to jump into the entrepreneurial game itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, especially in the employment world, right, it's very competitive. So I think it's always about how do you stand out better than the others. Now, I guess probably say something a bit controversial, but I don't think qualifications are kind of the be it end all. At the end of the day, if you have 5 A stars or 2 students, but the other person is much better at communicating, and maybe he or she doesn't have any qualifications, and she is a great network, as a true visionary, that's the person going to probably get the job, right? So I would just be thinking about, how do you make the maximum of your, how do you build your CV, or how do you build that kind of entrepreneurial mindset up from today? Maybe you have a true passion for, maybe it's beauty, or maybe it's, what are the biggest challenges for students in today's market? Well, you are a student and you probably understand that better than anybody else. So then start writing about it. And then you maybe turn it into some kind of blog. Then all of a sudden you're having 50, 60,000 readers reading your blog. Then you start inviting, people to contribute and give quotes. So I think just be, very commercially minded. And I think actually, a lot of this all comes back down to just networking. I think build up that, really strong network, right? It's so easy now to go and meet people, especially like on LinkedIn, like you highlighted, Twitter, Instagram, like just go out there. I mean, I think especially like while you're studying, a couple of years ago, I had a personal objective every day, and that was to message 100 really interesting people on Twitter every day. So their DMs were open. And I think the response rate was 50%. So every day for a whole year. So that's, it's about 36,000 people, give or take, 100 people a day times 365. 50% of those responded, which is about 15,000, give or take. Out of those 15,000, about 2,000 of those people became really strong connections. I still keep in touch with them today. Now, I know that's like a massive network. It's a spiral effect as well, right? So then they'll start introducing to you, then they'll start introducing to people. So I think just become a really good network, and just have that amazing network that nobody else has. I think that will actually put you in the strongest position than anybody else.
I think that's a really interesting point. And I've been banging on about networking for years because I think people don't realize how powerful having that. If you think of it as a spider's web, which is often how, right, the bigger that web gets, the more opportunities get caught in that web. And everyone on this call is going to be too young to remember 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. People in this call are not going to remember who Kevin Bacon is. You know him as the man who does the EE adverts, also one of the greatest actors of his generation. But I always think of networking as how many degrees are there between you and the person you want to talk to? How many calls do you need to make to get to a person, to get to the thing, to get to the funding? And the bigger your network is, the shorter that journey between the two. And I love that advice about basically chasing down connections. What do you do on a very practical level when you go to an event? Because there's lots of events and people, COVID is like starting to at least disappear. Events are back, networking is back. How do you actually get from the door into the first conversation? Because that's always where people are at their most scared. How do you get from the door to speaking to the person you want to speak to?
Yeah. So I think, so maybe there are a couple of different tips there. If you're not too shy and you're fine, best way I think is go and grab a juice or a drink at the bar, whatever there is there, tea, coffee, and then there's bound to be someone up there at the same time. Then you start saying like hi, or what brings you here? And I always hate it when people ask, so what do you do? Because it basically implies, if you're not good enough, I don't want to talk to you, right? So something along the lines of, what keeps you busy every day, or, what brings you here? And then maybe, if you're a little bit timid and maybe not, someone who likes networking as much, maybe just take a couple of friends with you to the first event, so you can help at least like nurture you in. There's also like, maybe a little bit harsh, if you're going to go there alone, you don't like to kind of be out there a little bit, there's not a huge amount of value or point you're going, right? But I think just be brave and just go out there. If there might be that one person in that whole room who may change your career forever, right? Maybe he or she is founder, an investor, CEO, XYZ, or even your mentor, potential mentor in the future. I think just go out there and then meet tons of people. And if you really like to meet people, then be the first one there at the event to be the last one out. Just meet everyone and just keep in touch with them. Like LinkedIn is fine, email is fine. And if you really resonate with those people, I just think WhatsApp is actually a great feature. It's a lot less informal, it's a bit more casual, and is more of a communication tool where you can connect with anyone at any time, right? Versus LinkedIn is a little bit more formal.
Yeah, a lot of meetings I go to now, people swap WhatsApp. That never used to happen before. So for anyone who's like still thinking, yeah, this networking thing sounds great, but it still sounds terrifying, what is the worst thing that's happened to you when you've gone up to somebody cold? Like remove it, because people are so scared of that. What's the worst thing that's ever happened when you've gone up to somebody at an event?
Oh, I mean, you always just have those people who don't really care, right? When you say, what do you do? And back then, you're like a 15 or 16-year-old, like, whatever, like, I'm busy. People will always doubt you, but I think that's what's important as you kind of progress through your career. Now, if you say like work at this venture capital fund, like people always want to speak to you, right? Or if you start writing and you start, becoming a name in a particular space, or you've done podcasting, or if you've been in the entrepreneurial world for like 10 years, right? I think it's just really important to build that brand, because people will start to recognize you and start to recognize your name. So the biggest takeaway maybe from today would be, I think just start today. Like whatever you're trying to do, just start today. And the more you delay, then the more chances are you're not going to make it happen, right? Tomorrow, if you want to start a company, then put an idea together, and like in an informal capacity, I'm very happy to give you feedback. If you're trying to meet people, then who do you want to meet? Like go out there and connect with them. And there's always someone out there in the world who knows that person. So find that person and just get to know them.
Absolutely. Has anyone slapped you across the face or thrown their drink at you when you've gone up to them cold at a networking event?
Oh, wow.
Like,
Not
no,
yet.
not
I
yet.
don't think so. I
Which
don't
is
think so, which is a good thing, right? It's a good
absolutely.
thing. So it's not going to happen to you guys.
I guess that's the point, is that the biggest thing, the worst thing that can happen when you try to speak to somebody cold is that they're not going to be interested to talk to you. I'm yet to meet anyone who's had like been slapped or had water thrown in their face. Be courageous. I think that's such an important word. If you go down the entrepreneurial journey, it is a tough journey. You got to develop a thick skin and just be courageous and kind of plow through. So I think that's really, really solid, really, really solid advice. It must have been quite something as a early teenage entrepreneur. Do you think that age, I mean, 13 is particularly young, but if you're a sort of 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old, which is young by general standards, is that a pro or a con in entrepreneurship, in going to venture capitalists, in looking for funding and starting a business?
I think it's a massive pro, to be honest. I mean, you know your generation most likely better than anybody else. What is the latest trend? Maybe your generation, or with similar ages, maybe our generation, don't want to go and work in a typical, career routes, banking, being a doctor, being a lawyer, X, Y, Z. Maybe you want to have the flexibility to work anywhere in the world. Well, that's hugely insightful to investors, because they know what's the next type of platforms that should be coming out, right? I think especially when you're starting a company, the media love it. So trying to get like media attention, which when I said earlier, it really helps kind of build your brand and build your name in the space. I think they love it. When you hear and read about 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds starting a company, everyone just loves reading those kind of stories. So I think that's a massive advantage. The only maybe challenge it has is you just don't get to do all the other things you really want to do. So that's like kind of hanging out with friends. If you're like really, really focused on building this kind of company at 17, 18, maybe you're more focused on the career route side of things. But I would always say, always make time for those friends and personal times, because it gets incredibly tiring. And I think it's really important just to take a step back, just reflect and go and, hang out with friends and let the chaos in your head settle a little bit.
Absolutely. And when you step back is often when the creative juices actually are able to find their way. Right? You've mentioned personal branding a few times, and I completely concur with you. Can you, again, on a very practical level, in terms of people hanging up from this call and going, I'm going to start building my personal profile, what does that look like? How do people sort of get that ball rolling? What are the different ways in which people might approach profile?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, you both have a great LinkedIn profile, so you might have some tips. I think the easiest step actually initially is, if you're not on LinkedIn or Twitter, like go and start building that brand, start connecting with people. That's kind of the first initial step, probably. The second is, if you're all quite entrepreneurial or savvy with money, start writing about that, because that's so interesting to the outside world who might not be the same age as you. Like if I saw a tweet from one of you and you talked about most of my friends now shop on Depop versus ASOS, well, that's really interesting, because why is that happening? Maybe people start buying secondhand clothes, which is major, right, in the world, which reduces waste and kind of all of this. So step one would be start building up your Twitter, LinkedIn profile, start kind of sharing what's going on through your mind. And it might not be entrepreneurial, maybe it's sports, maybe it's something to do with your personal passions. And then it takes a long time to, I think, kind of build that profile and to kind of have that media side of things, branding. I think then the second, third would be start going to these kind of networking events or events where you have a particular passion for. The more you go to those, the more connections you start to build, and the really good events you go to, if you continue going to them, people will start inviting you. Maybe they start inviting you to speak, and do that for a couple of years. And I think after that, you'll have a really good network. And by then, most of you most of you will be 21, 23. And, it just takes a long time, right? I mean, I think Vivi and I kind of been at this probably 10 years now. It takes a long time to build that insane network. But I think just, work really hard, and at some point, hopefully you just get to the stage where anyone you want to connect with or pick up the phone to, you probably can in some capacity.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So before we get to quick fire round, 3 things that people don't know about entrepreneurship.
Oh, that's a good question. 3 things people don't know about entrepreneurship. I don't think people realize how hard it is. It is really hard. I mean, we invest in 500-600 founders every year, and the pain and the hustle they go through is hugely inspiring, but it's amazing just to see how much grit and determination they have. But it's also surprising in some factors where maybe you didn't realize how hard this particular industry or this kind of product is maybe hard to build. The second is, I don't think people realize, if you're thinking about building a company also, I would start thinking about, maybe the country you live in today, maybe that's not the country you should be building in. Maybe there's bigger opportunity and better opportunities in places like South America, or like I'm particularly interested in South Korea, Indonesia, kind of Vietnam right now. For especially when some of the sectors we're looking at. And I think the third is that's a really good question. Maybe it's something, turn the question around a bit. Maybe it's what founders don't do enough of. And I don't think founders do enough of having that support network around them. I think in the early days, it is like we're mentioning, really hard, and you need the shoulders cry all night sometimes, right, when things aren't going according to plan. So again, one of the takeaways would be, hopefully from this, if you're looking to start some kind of business in the future, just find those 1 or 2 people outside the friends and family who you can really resonate with, you can have honest conversations with, and you can hopefully guide you through your entrepreneurial career.
Terrific. And so what do people get wrong when they're pitching for money?
I think a lot of the time people get wrong. First of all, and I was going to actually mention this earlier, don't be the smart cookie in the room. I think especially when people maybe a little bit young and they think then they know a law. Well, let's be honest, you don't know a law. You're just selling the pipe dream, right? So I think be incredibly humble, listen very well. Don't be the person who they think they know law, because especially as investors, we've seen all of it. And although we may not know everything, we probably have some better insights into kind of what's happening in the market, right? So be humble, don't be the smart cookie, really do your research. And I think just even when you're first starting, just make sure really small things, like you can use the company name, is the company trademarked. When people say there is no one doing this out there, let me assure you, there is somebody out there who's doing this. You need to look harder. And if you're trying to be the best possible entrepreneur or the best possible business, I just think about building and pitching like a founder, or like you're building a product. How can you be the best? How can you have the best possible pitch, like a founder? And going that it's almost like going for a job interview, right? How are you going to get that job interview? And similarly, how are you going to get that money? Is it going the extra mile and saying, which investors have invested in my category? How much are they invested? What are the emerging trends happening in categories on a worldwide basis? We failed in this market, but now we're inventing this market, and this is the market we're really focused on. And like I mentioned earlier, just don't worry about failing. I think investors love that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm always amused by Dragon's Den. 10 minutes, all this money. It's not even remotely, even Dragon's Den isn't remotely like what you see on television, which is really... So
if you guys if you haven't, I definitely recommend applying to all of these business competitions. I mean, Dragon's Den, if you want to do that, I don't think it's quite the same in reality. But I think it's a really good experience. There are a couple of these tech conferences where you can basically pitch for either money or support. I definitely do it, because regardless of the money, it's such good practice. Like pitching or speaking in front of a crowd of 2, 3, 4,000 people. Yes, it's incredibly nerve-wracking, and your belly should be churning when you're about to go on stage, but that's great experience. Then in the future, once you've done it 5, 10, 20 times, no problem, you can do it straight away.
100%. Right next to selling is speaking to people in public speaking, right? In terms of necessary skills. So one of our attendees is asking, how would you be able to help a student who wants to start an online business? We're not talking about money, because we're not pitching you at this point for money, although we are going to tell people how they can do that later. But in terms of support, how can a student go about getting help to get themselves kicked off? And I'm also going to say, a lot of your universities will have entrepreneurship hubs. So make sure that you are tapping your university for all possible resources. Ollie's just put his email address on there, so nag him afterwards for funding. But apart from money, what else would you say at this point?
I think just learn a lot. Really do listen to interviews, listen to technology shows. Like every day I listen to CNBC, Bloomberg, all of these tech shows, and just really spending at least an hour every day what is happening in the world, because I think that's really important also, because that should most certainly impact your company in some way. Like Vivi mentioned, most of your universities have some form of entrepreneurial hubs. Go and be part of those. These entrepreneur societies in particular, I saw there are a couple of from UCL here. Like, they're great, and we work with them, and that's a really good way for you to kind of get immersed in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The third is, now the world has kind of opened up a bit. There are quite a few of these kind of networking, maybe student entrepreneur related events. Definitely go along and just learn from people, see what people are building. Because at some point, one of these people who you meet at one of these business shows, like, they will be they will go on to create a really successful company, and it's good to surround yourself with people like them, right? And the fourth is, I think, just do a lot of reading. I mean, yes, it's important to see what's happening in the news every day, but like, just read about what's happening in the trends or in the market you want to try and create a company in. If it's about online selling, then learn from people who've done online selling. Reach out who are the early stage companies who have maybe who are a similar company to you. Like, just use your university network, or use your age to the advantage to reach out to these people. I think a really good tactic would be, maybe a good tactic, if you're starting a company and you want to learn how to sell, who are the 5 or 10 early stage companies similar to you, who you are fond of. These are not huge companies, they're early stage companies. You can find those founders' names on LinkedIn very easily. You can guess their email addresses very easily, just firstname@company.com, and just reach out to them and just say, hey, I'm a big fan of what you're building, and I'm looking to build this, and I would just love some advice. People will always give you the advice if you put in the time and the effort to that email, and there are no spelling mistakes. It's really well articulated. I'm pretty sure people will give you the time.
I could not agree with that more. And definitely milking your age. And I know we're not supposed to say things like this, but milking your age, if you're from an underrepresented ethnic group, women, there are all sorts of levers that you can pull. I definitely suggest going to every conference, certainly in the early stages as part of research. I mean, Money 2020 is on like right now, which I'm not at and would have liked to have been, and clearly Ollie's not at either. But if you're a 17 or 18-year-old and you want to start a fintech business and you call Money 2020 and go, I can't afford the fare, I reckon they'd give you a free ticket just to have you there. So, definitely pull all the levers that you can in order to milk everything that you can. I couldn't agree more. You mentioned reading and podcasts. So we're going to try and get some resource specifics out of you. So and we always go with 3, right? Because it's like the Steve Jobs thing. 3 top books for people who are at the very early stages, because obviously there is an unlimited library for startups and for entrepreneurs. But early stage, thinking about it, just about to start, 3 books that you would recommend.
Great. The first one was Shoot Dog, which was all about the Nike story.
Awesome. You should read it
awesome
anyway.
book. Yeah. I think you should read this one called Bad Blood, which was about how, and these are quite all entrepreneurial focused, right? Bad Blood was basically about a company that raised a couple $100 million, and it was basically all the frauds. Really interesting book. And are we coming on to podcasts or just books for now?
We'll talk podcasts as well.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll find it out.
And another book, maybe you have a good recommendation.
So I would definitely recommend Lean Startup, which is the book I wish I'd known about before I started the business. I basically followed the Lean methodology and then bought the book, not knowing that I had been copying that anyway. So I would definitely agree with both of these. I think Lean Startup, I think the hard thing about hard things, and we will put this list together in the newsletter for you. But the hard thing about hard things, which is Ben Horowitz's book from Andreessen Horowitz, which is kind of tier 1 venture capital firm out of the Valley. I think those would kind of be my number ones. But the Amazon delivery man knows me by name. Like he yells at me. So my bookshelf is exploding, but we'll put some of those down. Podcasts. What are because there's some amazing podcasts out.
Yeah, there are quite a few. I love, I'll write them in here as well. Bloomberg Studio 1.0. This is a podcast by Bloomberg all about interviewing, industry leaders on, basically how they created their companies. They've interviewed people like Roblox, not sure if you've had those guys, but a massive gaming company. They just interviewed some amazing, like these Bill Gates, Richard Branson, like all of these people, and the presenter is just awesome. Podcast How I Built This is pretty good, by someone called by Guy Raz, similar to Bloomberg Studio 1.0, just some really cool founders who he interviews. You got the Wired podcast, which is all about kind of the latest trends in tech. You had one on We Crashed, I think, recently, which was all about the kind of the WeWork story. Really interesting, just diving into what really happens. And that's it, I think, on podcasts.
Yep, I would just add to that the 20-minute VC, the Harry Stebbings one. Another young, although older than you, but only just, I think. But Harry did, he started the 20-minute VC podcast, which if you're interested in venture capital, and again, Ollie's done a great job in differentiating between kind of a side hustle, which we're going to do a session on in a couple of weeks on the 21st of June. So if you're not signed up, sign up for that. So side hustle, making a little bit of extra money on the side versus entrepreneurship of building a big business. If you want to be building a big business and you're already thinking about venture capital, then kind of where Ollie is working at Antler and the kind of stories on Harry's podcast are kind of where the direction is. By the way, you don't have to raise money, but this stuff it does make it easier if you're trying to build a huge one. The A16, anything that A16Z, which is Andreessen Horowitz, is worth listening to because it's fantastic. And Steve Bartlett, right? Here we go.
Looks a couple more are coming to memory now.
Looks like Ollie.
Looking at my
very
looking at my. Those are probably the latest. And this is actually a good one. Danny in the Valley. There you go.
There you go.
So a couple good ones.
We'll pop all of these into the newsletter so that we've got them. And just conscious, we're down to the kind of the last few minutes. What is your favorite entrepreneurial story to share with us?
There've been quite a few. I mean, it sounds really basic, but if I'm getting an Uber I love talking to Uber drivers because they're so fascinating. So one of them was, I can't remember where it was, I think I was in London. One of them had a chain of 27 Chinese restaurants, and this guy was, it was actually during the pandemic, and he wasn't quite sure what to do, and he was trying to meet some people kind of in the sector who are a little bit more advanced. And I said that I can't promise anything, but I think I can probably connect you to some people. So, people like Leon Restaurants, like those types of companies. I connected him to the founders of similar companies to that. I think after that, like, he raised maybe $5 or $10 million. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I just love just hearing small stories about that, right? But then you hear there was this company called Glorify in San Francisco that I just raised, which was a meditation app, a religious meditation app, and it was actually A16Z investment. And the founder was like, I think 20, 21, and they raised $10-15 million. Like, you just hear all these amazing stories all the time. I mean, I think everyone talks about kind of the Richard Bransons or like all of those kind of old school people, but they're kind of old school now, right? And everybody's heard about them before. We just love, and some of our founders, right? We just love meeting founders who come in for the first time and share their journey, share their vision. And for us, like, we're just about, if we really believe in you and we believe in your vision, we'll give you the money tomorrow. So yeah, if you're voting, we'd love to meet you.
You're going to be getting a slew of emails from people who are like, you're going to love my idea. The one resource I can ask you for is, you've mentioned a few times researching people. So obviously LinkedIn is obviously like the default one. But I'm thinking like things like Crunchbase. Are there any other specific sites where people might find what they need without and not necessarily know that that's out there? Obviously Wired, you mentioned, which is terrific. Any other places where people can do this kind of research? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd actually say probably Crunchbase is one of the best. Yeah. You have all the news publications, and don't forget, with news publications, I think as you're a student, you get student rates. So like, I read personally like the Times, which I think on the student membership is, I think, £2 a month or something. And all the content is really interesting. Crunchbase and news publications is probably the best. And also these kind of news publications and resources that turned into kind of YouTube, videos once a week. So like the Bloomberg technology YouTube channel is pretty good. Right now for you guys. There you go. Yeah, those are pretty good resources.
Terrific. And we will collate all of it into the newsletter. So just make sure you sign up to the newsletter. We'll put all of this in there. Ollie, as a parting thought to everybody in this room who's currently thinking, oh, this all sounds pretty good, I reckon I want to get started. What would you say to get people kind of to hang up from this and immediately start to get going?
Yeah.
Inspire
Why
people.
haven't you started already? No, I think on lighter notes, I think is a really exciting journey, and it's not easy, but I think anybody has the ability to kind of really create something really special. Don't take no for an answer. Like I mentioned earlier, be incredibly visionary but humble along the journey. Don't be that smart cookie who nobody wants to speak to again, and just listen. I think if you're a really good listener, that makes a great founder. Nobody likes hearing what they already know, what they want to hear. Like, I just love speaking to even founders who, they may say one question throughout the entire event. You may think that person is very quiet, but that question is the smartest question that's come out throughout the whole event. So I think just start tomorrow. Have an idea on what you want to do. Be focused, listen, and surround yourself with a great bunch of people. And just enjoy the journey. Like, if you didn't like it, then don't do it. But if we can help in any way, especially from an informal capacity, like, I'm very happy to help you. You have my email. Any questions you're not sure about, or any resources or if we can help you, at least point you in the right direction, we're very happy to. We're very collaborative, so we just love, supporting people where we can.